here is what's coming up on your horizon. Well, by most estimations, 2013 could be the year the U.S. economy pulls itself out of what best can be described as a post-recession funk. Unemployment is ever so slowly drifting downward, and new jobs are appearing even if they aren't the old jobs we once had. Today, our focus is on the economy.
The housing sector in particular is growing rapidly now, finally, after 5 years of declining or sluggish activity.
We'll look at what some of the hot jobs are in our economy and tell you how you can get one.
There are a lot of incredibly good paying jobs that have a career pipeline and a pathway that are based on credentials or certificates.
We look at an issue that is still looming large and only getting bigger, our national debt. And I sit down with the head of OCU's School of Business to talk about why infrastructure may matter, but pretty may not.
But we have become a nation obsessed with appearances, so it has to look right.
Stay with us for Oklahoma Horizon.
Oklahoma Horizon is made possible by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education.
Oklahoma's investment in Career Tech provides more than nationally recognized technology education and training. It produces solid financial returns for the state's economic future. Oklahoma Career Tech, elevating our economy.
And the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping good people grow good things. And now, from the Career Tech Studios in Stillwater, here's your host, Rob McClendon.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us here on Horizon. Well, we begin today, as we've started each new year, with our annual economic outlook. We'll be examining the major sectors of our economy, taking a look at both where they've been and where they're headed. But ultimately, when it comes to our economy, most people are concerned with just one thing. Will I have a job, and can I support my family with it? We begin by facing the facts on jobs in the economy in a post-recession world. Here's Frank Cessna.
Well, perhaps you've heard we're in the worst period of unemployment since the 1930s. The real question is, what do we do about it?
Jobs, jobs, jobs. It's how we make money, 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 but who generates the jobs and how? Those are the trillion-dollar questions. Since 2009, the official unemployment rate has ranged between 8 and 10%. Just a few years ago, in the boom times, it was 5%. And for young people, the jobless rate is higher still. It's why a lot of those empty nests aren't really empty yet. Minorities are having a very tough time. And the underemployment rate, people who are making less than they did or working less than they want or who have just given up, is more than double the unemployment rate. Lots of jobs have gone overseas, where labor's much cheaper. Economic stimulus seemed to help some industries, like finance and autos, but Main Street was largely left out. The Federal Reserve has driven interest rates down to their lowest levels ever. Super cheap money. But when you owe more on your house than it's worth, or you're out of work, or the banks just won't lend to you, it doesn't help much. Tax cuts and incentives are nice, but most businesses say they hire when demand goes up for the things they make or supply. Amid the wreckage, there are shoots of green. The government reports some job growth in professional and business services, temp help, consulting, computer systems design, healthcare, manufacturing.
High unemployment is changing the landscape, maybe for the long term, and a real recovery could be a long, hard slog. These are difficult facts to face.
And while national unemployment rates have been hard to bring down, it's not been for the lack of trying. Since 2009, more than $800 billion have been spent by the federal government to both create and hopefully save jobs. And while the success of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act has been highly debated, what is completely evident is that the spending it required is one of the factors that has grown our national deficit. We'll have more on that later in our show. But when we return, we look at Oklahoma's economy and see where some leading economists think it's headed.
You're watching Oklahoma Horizon, featuring some of the good things that are happening in the great state of Oklahoma.
Well, 2013 could be more of the same in terms of Oklahoma's economy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. That according to some leading economists at this year's Economic Outlook Conference. 2012 was a good year in Oklahoma. Employment grew by 2.5%, while Oklahoma City boasted one of the lowest unemployment rates in the nation. Median household incomes rose for the year, and industries hit hardest by the national recession began to bounce back.
The housing sector in particular is growing rapidly now, finally, after 5 years of declining or sluggish activity, even growing faster than economists expected, I think, in 2012. And there's never been a recession while housing activity is growing. So that's a positive sign.
And one the Federal Reserve Bank's Chad Wilkerson and other economists at this year's Economic Outlook Conference say could continue into 2013, if only slightly off from 2012's rapid rise out of the recession.
But growth is not necessarily going to be as strong as it was last year because we seem to have peaked in energy employment over the summer.
Dan Rickman is with OSU Spears School of Business and says Oklahoma could add over 26,000 jobs in the coming year, with the strongest growth in professional and business services, followed by construction. Other job growth areas in 2013 are state and local government, leisure and hospitality, and the wholesale trade. And while Oklahoma's energy sector propelled our economy in 2012, this year we could see a slowing in that growth, even a slight constriction in jobs, dependent upon whether natural gas prices rebound this winter and oil prices continue to moderate.
We are tied into the national world economies, and obviously the energy sector itself is tied into overall demand conditions.
And while Oklahoma's overall economy remains strong, the economists gathered here believe more attention needs to be focused on long-term fundamentals that support continued growth.
Education is going to be the key to our long-term growth, particularly education in key occupations with the science and technology and engineering and management occupations.
Stephen McKeever is Oklahoma's Secretary of Technology.
The necessity for an educated workforce can't be overstated. Many of the industries, indeed most of the industries for Oklahoma, are science and technology-based industries, and they need that educated workforce to survive. The more that we can have in that workforce, educated in the right way, trained in the right way, the more we can protect ourselves.
In an ever-changing world. So how can we all take part in this projected prosperity? Well, that is just one of the questions I asked Deidre Myers with Oklahoma's Department of Commerce. Deidre, what is the most important thing we need to think about as a state when it comes to Oklahoma's prosperity?
Well, prosperity is based on wealth and increasing wealth, and there are a number of ways to do that. The one that is probably the most common is wages. That's how most households earn their wealth or and become more prosperous, or the wages they earn. What we know in a 21st century economy is that the ability to earn wages is highly correlated to a skill that you have. And so one of the things that we have got to do is make sure that more Oklahomans have a post-secondary skill. That doesn't necessarily mean a bachelor's degree, although bachelor's degrees do have the highest wages and are able to accumulate, those households are able to accumulate more wealth over a long run. However, there are a lot of incredibly good paying jobs that have a career pipeline and a pathway that are based on credentials or certificates. And so for the state to be prosperous, we need to make sure as many Oklahomans as possible have a particular skill in the new economy.
We've seen household incomes rise fairly dramatically in Oklahoma.
Yes. In fact, in the last year, according to the Census Current Population Survey, Oklahoma's household median income, which is the midpoint, that's important to remember, went up 9%, increased 9%. Overall, the U.S. actually diminished a little over 1%. So it shows just how important several industries are to the state of Oklahoma, including our energy industry, but also aerospace and defense, manufacturing, agriculture, information and financial services, as well as transportation and distribution. Those have all been high growth areas for the state. There are core competencies, and they have added wealth to a vast majority of Oklahoma's households over the past couple of years.
So the skills-based education and training that you're talking about, does it fit into all those industry sectors you just mentioned?
Absolutely. Each of those industry sectors, or we call them ecosystems because they're larger environments of companies that work together, require highly skilled labor. It's around STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and the kinds of skills that we need to compete not just in a nation or against Texas, but internationally against Mexico, Malaysia, or even Germany.
Deidre Myers, thank you so much.
Still to come on Oklahoma Horizon, how free are free markets? But first, 16 trillion and growing.
Well, the federal checkbook has been in overdraft territory for so long, it feels like business as usual. Certainly not a good feeling, though, to get comfy with. Economists differ over whether it's fair to compare the whole country's balance sheet to our households. But if you were bringing home a monthly $4,000 paycheck while spending $7,000 month after month, it's bound to catch up with you. And that's what we've been doing with our federal deficit. The debt hanging over our collective American household surpassed $16 trillion last year, which if you divide that up between every warm-blooded American, it's over $4,000 apiece that we're all in the red. Once again, here's Frank Sesno to help us face the facts.
Our parents warned us, stay out of debt. Well, sorry, Mom, sorry, Dad. We've got a lot of it, thanks largely to Uncle Sam.
The national debt is heading for $16 trillion, a figure so large they had to modify this national debt clock in New York City just to accommodate all the digits. But think of it another way, $50,000 per citizen. If we had the money, that'd be enough for every single one of us to buy a Mercedes. Of course, debt isn't automatically evil. If it weren't for debt, most people couldn't secure a mortgage to buy a house or a loan to start a small business and spur economic growth. Borrowing and credit, as every mom and pop store knows, are essential for investment and profitability. But some debt isn't smart, it's just plain scary. Right now, about 6% of the U.S. federal budget is used just to pay the interest on the national debt, and that figure will keep growing more if interest rates rise. Our total national debt now exceeds the country's total economic output. Now, when you use that yardstick, a lot of other countries are deeper in the hole, including Japan.
Too much debt can squeeze the life out of anything. Families, companies, whole countries. And if that's what's down the road, all the more reason we have to face the facts today.
Well, in our nation's history, we have run up our national debt before, but this time it is a little different. Historically, we've seen our national debt skyrocket 5 times before, all during wartime. The War of Independence, the War of 1812, the Civil War, then again in World War I and World War II. But what makes this time different is how we got here. This time, our debt revolves much more around who is going to pay what in and who's going to get what out. Sure, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been expensive, but you also have to figure in the recession. When the Wall Street banks blew themselves up, tanking the economy, that pushed us further into debt because of the slowing of productivity, which does not even account for the costs of our aging population and the drag medical costs have on the economy. So while the problems we face today may be much more abstract than having to pay for a war, what is concrete is that every second our federal deficit keeps ticking upward. In 2011, the federal government spent right at $114,000 a second. But it only took in just over $73,000 per second, leaving a deficit of $41,000 per second, which adds up. Take that 1 second of debt in $1 bills and the stack stands almost 15 foot tall. In 1 minute, it grows all the way to 886 feet, which is taller than the Titanic is long. So how does this compare to previous deficits? Well, in the height of World War II, U.S. deficit spending rose to 30% of our GDP, which is our total economic output. But it fell dramatically after the war, and for almost 40 years, we only spent what we took in, until the Reagan years when deficit spending rose again to 4%. But those deficits turned into surpluses during the Clinton years, but once again began to rise in the year 2000 to today's current 9% of U.S. GDP. So just in this past minute, we have fallen another 2.5 million in the red. So at the current rate, the federal government is spending over $41,000 a second that we now have to borrow. Altogether, the federal deficit now stands at $16 trillion, which is a lot of money, almost too much to even wrap your arms around. So we thought we'd give you a little perspective. Let's look at some numbers. $16 trillion could pay off every American home mortgage 2 times over. Now, $16 trillion would also pay for the cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan 12 times over. Now, $16 trillion could also pay off every student loan across the U.S. 16 times over. And here is my absolute favorite. $16 trillion would buy either a top-of-the-line Mercedes or 2 good old American cars for every single one of us. Now, if you'd like to see more facts just like these, just head to our website at okhorizon.com, where we have a new fact of the day courtesy of Face the Facts USA.
Oklahoma Horizon is now portable. Just subscribe to our weekly podcast. Visit iTunes.com, where you can download our show for your listening or viewing convenience.
Well, much of the debate around our deficit focuses on taxes. Are they too much, too little, or just not well spent? At this year's Economic Outlook Conference, I sat down with the Dean of OCU's Minders School of Business, Jonathan Wilner, to talk about free enterprise, our tax code, and why pretty can be deceiving.
We have a country that's sort of obsessed with appearances now. The details of what is considered a really cool gift for your 16-year-old daughter in Dallas drive me crazy. But we have become a nation obsessed with appearances, so it has to look right. Well, that's the sort of thing that our automobile industry did there in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when Toyota and Honda came in, and what they had was really reliable cars, things that worked right, got good gas mileage, and they held up across time. Our car companies got obsessed with fit and finish. Doesn't it look nice? By the 1980s, our car companies are toast. They need to be protected by our government in the form of voluntary export restraints. People figured out that the substance of these cars was vastly more important than the color of the paint on the outside. The same thing is true with economic development. The baseline, the stuff that's behind the scenes, the ugly, gritty, dirty work is the necessary condition for growth. So you can have a really beautiful arena, but if people can't get there, it doesn't matter. If the arena is there, people can get there, and it's a hideous monstrosity, you can still sell it out. I give you the Boston Red Sox in Fenway Park. They keep selling it out, and this thing is a dinosaur. There are seats that are behind a vertical iron pillar, and I will pay $60 to get that seat because I want to watch the Red Sox, even if it is an old stadium. It's the people that matter. It's the nitty-gritty that gets you economic development.
I've heard you say that Americans need to get real about what free markets can and what they cannot do. What do you mean by that?
Free markets is generally, all the models that people talk about, what they mean when they say free markets is actually perfectly competitive markets. It's quite a bit different. So a monopoly, a local monopoly, say, in a city with power, is not necessarily a perfectly competitive market, though it well could be a free market. And the outcomes that people project for perfectly competitive markets are the sorts of things that I want. Great efficiency, higher income, growth. That's all perfectly competitive markets. But most of the time what we have in this country is quasi-free markets that are not perfectly competitive. The consequence of that is we don't get the outcomes of the perfectly competitive market, though we pretend as if that's going to happen. It's simply not the appropriate one. Airlines are a perfect example. This is an oligopoly. The prices are not what they would be if they were perfectly competitive. And we have huge amounts of evidence to suggest the mergers that have taken place with these airlines has actually raised the prices to the consumer. It's reduced the number of flights, and that's led to economic inefficiency. Are these airlines profitable now? Sort of. They blame the unions blame somebody else, and Southwest is making a killing. So that suggests that what's happening with these so-called major airlines is not perfect competition. If it was perfect competition, they'd be acting like Southwest. They'd have happy, well-paid employees, they would hit their on time, and their customers would like it. Instead, what we have is a few majors who keep merging and keep being inefficient. And that tells you right there, that whole industry is not perfectly competitive. The feeder to them is airplanes. There's really only two companies, Boeing and Airbus. There's a few smaller ones, CRJ and Embraer coming in, but that's an oligopoly there as well. These are not perfectly competitive markets. We need to start designing policy that addresses the fact that these aren't perfectly competitive markets, they are imperfectly competitive markets. Therefore, our policies should deal with reality, not some sort of ideal.
Let's talk about taxes if we can. Could higher taxes on our nation's highest earners, could it slow down our economy?
It might, but probably not very much. Some of the arguments that people use, it's basically what's called the Laffer curve, is that if you raise the tax rates on the very rich, then they will do one of two things. One, they will work less, and two, they will invest less in their business. And when economists think of investment, they think of real investment. This is not playing on the stock market. This is actually buying new plant and equipment, not buying existing one. That's what makes an economy grow, real investment, new plant and equipment. That's what we need. Well, if you raise their tax rates, most of the non-trust baby types don't work any less. If you lower them, they won't work anymore. Quite simply, they love working. They work 80 hours a week, pretty much regardless of a change in a couple of thousand, $20,000, $100,000 a year for these people. They're going to keep working that way because that's the type of people they are. A few might back off, but not much. In terms of investment, well, quite frankly, they're just not doing a heck of a lot of it right now anyway. You can see all that money sitting on the sidelines watching. Well, it's not doing anything. It is a scary proposition from an economist because all that money, about $1.6 trillion worth of it, is sitting in the banks waiting to flood the economy. So hopefully we've got a dam built up and we won't have a spike of inflation as a result of the sudden increase in investment in the future.
In the debate over the taxes, are we actually missing the boat when we don't talk about what we're doing with those taxes?
No, absolutely. The whole idea of any business and any government, when it comes to the finances, to look at both sides of the equation. The spending, well, what are we going to buy? The cost of it is, what do we have to pay to get it? And what you want to do in business and hopefully in government, but no guaranteed, is to be thoughtful in what you're doing so you have a net positive. That's why this fiscal cliffs bother people, is that they recognize a 10% across the board cut to everything is probably not the best solution. Some places maybe you can cut 20%, others you don't even want to cut, and you want to balance that. Then you want to balance that against the cost. Okay, how are we going to raise some money to help offset that? What's the most efficient way to do it? Recognizing that if we cut expenditures and we cut taxes, then things are going to change. What's going to give us the best result? What combination of them is going to get the best result? And what defines the best result is part of what the argument is about. Where are we trying to go as a country? What are we trying to achieve? There isn't uniform agreement on that.
Thank you, Dr. Wilner.
Thank you.
If you're interested in Oklahoma culture, you can keep up with us throughout the week on the Red Dirt Chronicles blog. Look for the On the Horizon postings on Tuesdays and Fridays, and tell us what you think.
Next time on Oklahoma Horizon, we look at health care, both its costs and its availability around Oklahoma.
Not only do we have less physicians than most states, but we have an aging physician population in rural Oklahoma. So we have many communities, almost every county has a health care shortage, except for probably Tulsa and Oklahoma City.
Healthcare and the Sooner State. A Oklahoma show for the Heartland, Oklahoma Horizon. Well, if this era of high unemployment proves anything, it's how difficult it is to answer what seemingly is a simple question. How do we make more jobs? Private employers hire when business is growing and they're optimistic about the future. But employers won't hire if they don't see consumers ready to spend. Now, consumers don't spend if they're worried about losing their jobs. It's kind of a catch-22 that has virtually locked our economy into a stalemate For over the past year, in many ways, our economy is only as strong as we think it is. Ever since 1967, consumer confidence has been reported in a monthly index that is widely regarded as a good barometer of the health of our economy. It's reached an all-time high of 144 points in January of 2000 and then fell to a record low of 25 points in February of 2009. Now, in November, it had climbed its way back to 73.7 points, which is the highest it's been in over 5 years. Although no one questions the statistical rigor of this survey, experts caution that it is what they call a lagging rather than a leading indicator, in part because we're consumers. What most of us know about the economy relies simply on what we hear. And this past election year, we heard plenty, most of it negative. No wonder it has taken us a while to feel better about an economy that's still scratching its way back ever so slowly. I'm Rob McClendon. Thanks for watching. See you back here next week.
Thank you for watching Oklahoma Horizon.